Joy is your typical overdriven overachiever. No one at her organization even feels that they have put so much into the company, at least not as much as Joy has. Joy has given her all to the organization and still does, so much so that she barely has a life outside of work. And you can definitely rule out something as trivial as a dating history. Joy is an employee of McDonald Webber, a Washington-based organization specializing in data analysis. Joy helps gather and curate data and also conducts overall assessments for clientele business organizations and other to help them take calculated and informed decisions, while leading a survey on a focus group to gather information about the experiences of individuals who shop at Weatherden's, a large store chain, and a client of theirs, Poppy Weatherden, the owner of the Weatherden stores, notices Joy's competence and adeptness in handling the affair and immediately takes a liking to her. While in the middle of the focus group meeting, Joy's phone pings as she receives a text from her close friend and confidante, Renee. The text informs Joy that not only is Mrs. Weatherden present at the office, but they are both actively watching the interview through a one-way glass. After concluding the meeting with the focus group, Joy steps out of the enclosed room to rejoin Renee. Unfortunately, Mrs. Weatherden had already left by the time she emerged from the focus group meeting. However, Renee informs Joy of Mrs. Weatherden's apparent favorable comments and all-round disposition towards her work, which serves to lighten up Joy's face for at least a second or two. Joy had been working her butt off for years, and she felt it was about to pay off. In a couple of days, the company will be hosting its annual Christmas gala, and although it isn't official, everyone, including Joy, knows she may just be up for a promotion. After a quick chat, Joy and Renee realize that they still haven't picked out a dress for the Christmas gala yet. Taking advantage of the fact they just concluded a focus group for a legendary department store, the two scurry down to Weatherden's. At Weatherden's, after prancing around for a bit, Joy spots a teal dress she feels would be just right for her. In the midst of her deliberation, Mrs. Weatherden slides up to her almost stealthily. After a quick greeting, Mrs. Weatherden puts Joy on the spot by asking her what she thinks of the data they have acquired so far. Joy hesitates for a moment, knowing that it isn't exactly in favor of the company rules to engage directly with clients, much less to spill info about unfinished assessments. However, she is compelled to oblige when Mrs. Weatherden insists on having her personal opinion. Eventually opening up, Joy explains that even though a bunch of data does show that online shopping is fast becoming the new norm, a lot of people still appreciate the warmth, care, and general welcoming atmosphere that the Weatherden store provides, especially during the festive times. While conversing with Mrs. Weatherden, Joy reminisces about a fond childhood memory involving her now deceased mother. Using the fond memory of her experience shopping at the Weatherden store with her mom as a kid, Joy uses her nostalgia to express the homely and welcoming atmosphere, which Weatherden's uses to trump the convenience of shopping online. Having heard Joy's take on the issue, Mrs. Weatherden compliments her taste in clothing and retreats somberly. Joy throws a worried glance at Renee, who in turn stares uneasily. Joy's little display of kindness could so easily come back to bite them in quite a number of ways. Nonetheless, it's not like ignoring Mrs. Weatherden's emphatic and passionate request was an option, at least not for Joy. Later that evening, Margie Carter, the research director at McDonald Webber, approaches Joy with an air of frustration and what could be perceived as a hint of disappointment. She proceeds to reprimand Joy for her earlier conversation with Poppy Weatherden. Margie's query is that even though Joy is a valued member of the organization who has proven her salt time and again, spilling information that could influence decision-making in business to a client before the overall assessment is complete could prove really fatal and destructive to the client, and also to them as a company. More so in this instance, because she feels that Joy is letting her feelings of nostalgia get in the way of making a calculated decision. Even though months of research points to the fact that the world is moving in a more pro-online shopping direction, Joy's opinionated report to Mrs. Weatherden at the store may have implied quite heavily that the traditional in-person shopping method still carries just as much appeal, attraction, and grandeur, at least at Weatherden's. Margie asks Joy to refrain from giving out any other feeling-based opinions and focus on working with the data in hand instead. Meanwhile, a couple hundred miles away from New York in the little town of Crystal Falls, Ben Andrews is driving to the hospital, his primary place of assignment, with an upbeat attitude and a feeling of peaceful bliss as he takes in the festive scenery. Christmas has always been Ben's favorite time of the year, little wonder, when he lived in a town where everyone was hell-bent on going all out every year. Getting to the hospital, Ben runs into his pregnant secretary, who briefs him on the tasks for the day. Working as an administrator, Ben's job focuses more on running the entire hospital, as opposed to actually attending to patients. Ben once again thanks his assistant for offering to take his place as a judge for the town's gingerbread contest, as this would see him finally be able to participate with his mom. Somewhere in Crystal Falls still, Joy's aunt, who is actively preparing for a cookie contest, reaches for some supplies sitting at the top of a shelf using a ladder, which results in an accident where she sprains an ankle. A friend of her aunt, who happens to be Ben's mom, calls Joy and informs her of her aunt's predicament. On hearing this disheartening news, Joy immediately races across the country to be by her aunt's side. On getting to the hospital, she runs into Ben, who we find out is an old friend of hers. When her mother passed away and Joy had to live with her aunt, Ben was super nice in helping her get through the grieving period by taking her to the movies and on dates. And even though they never really dated, the two seem to have a lingering attraction that can't help but make you wonder if you'll ever get to see those feelings develop. After reuniting with her aunt, who she hadn't seen in a while, Joy finds out that her injury will stop her from carrying out her preparations for the cookie competition, which she feels is completely unacceptable, being a 5-time winner and also the reigning champion. Seeing her aunt's displeasure, Joy decides to help prepare the cookies for the competition, a Herculean undertaking she is definitely not prepared for. Being her aunt's partner and a co-champion, Ben offers his help, but Joy feels she is more than capable of handling the task all by herself. As Joy leaves the hospital in her car, she accidentally backs into a truck parked behind her. Ben, who witnesses this, playfully chastises her for a bit before eventually revealing that the truck is his. Fortunately, there is no damage done to Ben's truck. On the other hand, however, Joy's Mini Cooper has a broken brake light. Ben proves himself useful by recommending a place where she can get it fixed for no more than a box of pizza. Back at her aunt's, Joy unpacks the decoration supplies for the cookie contest, or cookie crawl, as it is more commonly called. She designs herself a dynamic to-do list that not only includes tasks relating to baking and decorating, but also demarcates a side of a list to her work, which she now has to do remotely. After a brief video chat with Margie, Joy gets the go-ahead to stay in Crystal Falls and help out her aunt after all. She has accrued more than enough unused leave and vacation days to do so. Although she does promise to make it back for the Christmas gala, Ben comes by later with a truckload of boxes full of even more decorations and supplies, which he claims are just the other half of the bunch Joy has found in the house. Again, Ben offers his help, but once again he is declined by the overachieving Joy, who still feels she has got everything under control. When he sees that Joy has begun to whip up a batch of cookies without so much as deciding on a theme for the event, Ben expresses a slight look of disapproval. However, Joy assures him that before long, she is bound to get inspired. And in the meantime, this is a sure way to get on the ball. Sensing his apparent disapproval, Joy asks Ben for some theme ideas, even though she is still actively refusing to accept any help from him. Ben appears confused about this, and then to make matters worse, Joy offers to pay for any suggestions he provided. Feeling insulted, Ben makes some speech about how Crystal Falls is a place where everyone helped and looked out for each other, because they wanted to, and not because they wanted something in return. The next morning, Joy drives to the local coffee house for a steamy cup and runs into Ben on her way out. She apologizes to him for her behavior the previous day, and Ben in turn apologizes for being a bit too sensitive and overreacting. Apparently, Ben had been married before, and although divorced now, he felt triggered by Joy's actions the previous day because they strongly reminded him of his ex-wife. While the two are conversing within the coffee house, Ben receives a phone call and steps out. Joy, who later goes out to meet him, finds him a bit worse for wear. After she inquires, Ben explains to Joy that he was only able to take part in the gingerbread competition with his mom because his assistant was taking his place as a judge. However, now that she has given birth a week earlier than anticipated, that will no longer be possible. Suddenly, Ben's eyes brighten as an idea leaps into his mind. He then asks Joy to take on the role of judge at the gingerbread tournament. This way, he could still get to compete alongside his mom. After a bit of pleading and insisting on Ben's part, Joy finally agrees to this. In return, Joy enlists Ben's help in preparing for the cookie crawl competition. After all, it's a two-person job. Later on, while unpacking a box of decorations, Joy stumbles on a little green ornament she received from her mom as a kid. It is quite obvious how much of a treasure this is to her, as she caresses it for a while before gently placing it aside. While whipping up a batch of cookies, Joy speaks to Renee on video chat, and the two swap updates about their life. Joy tells her friend of her plight and how much of a big task preparing for the cookie crawl competition is proving to be, while Renee informs Joy about the bleak situation of things back at the office. Apparently, something is going on with the Weatherden's account, and even though no one knows exactly what is happening, someone overheard Margie's assistant talking about bringing up all of the Weatherden's files which date back to at least a decade. Even though it is just a rumor, and Joy isn't exactly the one in charge of the account, she still appears to feel sour about the entire state of affairs. She likes Mrs. Weatherden and would definitely be sad to lose her as a client. Just then, Ben comes over to help with the preparations. Renee introduces Ben to Renee over the video chat, and Renee gives off a slight impression which suggests that Joy may have mentioned him once or twice before then. After saying bye to Renee, Joy and Ben then proceed to whip up yet another batch of cookies, which they store in the refrigerator before sitting down to drum up some ideas for a theme. While shooting down a bunch of horrible ideas from Joy, Ben mistakenly breaks her deer ornament, effectively dampening the moment. However, before Joy comes back with a broom to get rid of the mess, Ben takes a couple of the broken pieces and sneaks them into his pocket. Later on, Ben takes Joy to the local mechanic to finally get her brake lights repaired, and as an apology for breaking her precious ornament, he offers to cover the cost of the repairs. At the car repair shop, it turns out Ben wasn't joking when he said earlier that Joy could get her car fixed for just a box of pizza. After giving the pizza to the repair guy, the two get on their way. Next, Ben takes Joy to see Phil, the man in charge of the gingerbread contest, who gives Joy a fairly large and thick book, which he explains is a much smaller version of the main guide, which contains everything she will need to know to be a proper judge. Working on their joint project, Joy and Ben begin to develop feelings towards each other. While brainstorming for a theme idea for the cookie tournament, they both get carried away and forget about lunch. After having dinner together at a popular local diner, Joy and Ben run into Ben's parents. In a conversation with his mother away from his dad and Joy, we get to understand more about Ben's divorce and how he experienced some significant emotional turmoil in his last relationship. Back at home, Joy receives a call from Margie, who informs her that since Renee is away on a surprise trip with her boyfriend, she will have to help draw up a report on a case Renee is handling. This means even more work for the already overly stressed Joy, and as such, she isn't very thrilled about the development. Back at his place, we see Ben sit down at a table in his garage, surrounded by a bunch of tools and equipment. And then he sets on the table broken shards of glass, pieces of Joy's ornament which he accidentally smashed. What exactly does he have in mind? The next morning, while at the hospital to visit her aunt and give her updates about the preparations for the cookie crawl contest, Joy has a run-in with Ben's mom, and the two get into a conversation. When Ben's mom asks about Joy's life in Washington, Joy all but confesses that she barely has one outside of work. She also admits that even though her job doesn't necessarily bring her as much joy and happiness as she would want, she had sunk in too much time and effort into her career to just up and quit. However, Ben's mom encourages her to put herself first and not hesitate to choose her own happiness before anything else, including work. Later, Joy meets up with Ben. In an attempt to tackle their lack of inspiration for a theme idea, Joy suggests a trip into the outdoors, a change of scenery. This, she explains, will help spark their creativity. After a long day of outdoor activity that sees the two stop at an ice rink, and then in a snow-laden forest, the two finally decide on the theme of Mother Nature for their cookie crawl contest decorations. Back at her aunt's house, Joy and Ben share an intimate moment that gets absolutely ruined when Ben pulls away only inches from a kiss. Apparently, he still has some baggage from his previous marriage that requires sorting, and this manifests itself in the form of insecurities. Feeling a tad frustrated, Joy goes to the fridge for some cookies, but unfortunately, she forgets how much attention the aged fridge requires to get it to shut completely, and as a result, the refrigerator pops back open just as Joy leaves the room. The next morning, Joy awakens to find out that the entire top layer of the fridge has defrosted and gone bad, meaning she has to redo most of the baking again. While venting to Renee on the phone about this, she discovers that Renee was never so preoccupied that she couldn't handle the reports, but instead she learns that her boss Margie intentionally doubled the work on her plate for no reason. This doesn't bode well for Joy, as she feels that Margie is probably the biggest factor in her getting the promotion. The event that transpired between Joy and Ben left things awkward between the two. Ben's actions from the previous night complicates the relationship between the two for a while, as the two become confused and hesitant on what steps to take next. However, Later that day, when Ben hears about Joy's bad cookie situation from his mother, who heard it from Joy's aunt, he shows up at Joy's aunt's house beside his mom and a dozen other neighbors, in order to help Joy get ready in the little time she has left. At the end of the night, Ben hangs back a while to apologize to Joy for the awkwardness his actions caused between them, and the two handle things like adults and decide to move on, effectively reconciling their relationship. After overseeing the gingerbread competition, where Ben and his mother win first place, Ben meets up with Joy just as she is getting ready to leave for Washington to attend the Christmas gala. He thanks her for her help with the event and hands her a boxed present as an appreciation. Even though Joy mentions she will be returning the next day for the cookie crawl contest, Ben still insists on giving her the present now. After expressing her gratitude, Joy travels back to Washington for the Christmas gala. As she gets ready back at her place in Washington, Joy finally opens up Ben's present, unveiling a little artistic expression of his feelings in the form of a heart-shaped wooden crest. Embedded in the middle are fragments from the broken pieces of Joy's ornament. It is obvious that Ben's gift really means a lot to Joy, as she clearly appears to be swept up by the gesture. At the gala, Joy finally reunites with Renee after what felt like ages apart. Amidst rumors of the company losing Worthingtons as a client, Joy is anxious about how much of this has to do with her and worries about how it will affect her chances of getting that promotion. She later runs into Mrs. Weatherden, who once again compliments her for her efforts in handling their accounts and for her honest opinions. Mrs. Weatherden also informs Joy of a couple of changes in their business operations. On hearing about the Joy's cookie competition, Mrs. Weatherden also notes that she has some relations in Crystal Falls before waltzing away. Just then, Margie approaches Joy to inquire from her what her discussion with Mrs. Weatherden was about. Margie then confirms the tragic loss of the Weatherden's account and expresses her desire for Joy to double down on her work starting from the next day, which of course means that Joy won't be able to go back for her aunt's cookie contest. Without so much as giving it a second thought, Joy refuses to comply with her boss's demands and incidentally quits on the spot. Later, Ben, in an attempt at making a romantic gesture, arrives at the gala in a nice black suit, only to realize that he is dressed in the attire of the waiters. In embarrassment, he has a change of heart and leaves immediately, but not without being spotted by Joy. She chases after him, but only gets out in time to watch his car zoom off. And even when she tries to call him, Ben refuses to pick up or even return her calls. Back in Crystal Falls, Joy's aunt is finally free to leave the hospital and gets home to find that she left the preparations for the competition in capable hands. When her aunt asks about Ben and his family, and when they will be coming over, Joy replies that she didn't know, and then goes on to explain to her distraught aunt the rift between herself and Ben. She reiterates how she had seen Ben at her Christmas gala back in Washington, and how he had left without so much as saying a word to her. Joy also informs her aunt that she has been trying to reach him since then, but Ben is actively ignoring every one of her calls and text messages, and has also failed to return any one of them. Joy also expresses her confusion and frustration about this, especially considering the fact she felt they worked really well together and had gotten pretty close over the course of the contest preparation process. However, Joy's aunt just notes that these feelings riling up within Joy mean only one thing, that she is in love. Joy's aunt is actually happy to see her be occupied with such mundane thoughts for what felt like the first time ever. Later, Joy leads her aunt to the center of the nature-inspired decoration. She is excited by just how wonderful the decorations look, which clearly display just how much work and effort her niece must have put into it. Joy's aunt is elated to discover that Joy will no longer be returning to Washington, but instead will be staying with her. She sees this as the best Christmas gift ever. After moping about for some time, Ben hears from his parents that Joy plans to settle in Crystal Falls, and once again his hopes are renewed. At the cookie competition, Ben's and Joy's hard work pays off as they win first place. During the course of the ceremony, Joy receives an unexpected guest in the form of Renee. She is delighted to welcome her best friend, who explains that she isn't about to miss something so important to her friend Joy, not for anything in the world. Another shocking turn of events occurs when Joy surprisingly runs into Mrs. Weatherden. After complimenting her for the efforts she put into the preparation of the event, Mrs. Weatherden explains that she just had to see for herself what the big fuss is about. She also personally informs Joy of the fallout between Weatherden's and her previous work organization, McDonald and Weber. She explains that she took her business's accounts away from McDonald and Weber because she has decided to create an in-house marketing department at her own company. After explaining, Mrs. Weatherden then offers Joy a job working as part of the leadership team in the new department at Weatherden's, there in Crystal Falls, to which Joy gladly agrees. Unsurprisingly, Ben turns up to the party almost out of nowhere. Weaving through the crowd of party guests, Joy walks up to an apologetic Ben, who follows her outside. After apologizing for his erratic behavior, Ben finally asks her out to dinner, officially this time, to which she says yes amidst a tender smile. Underneath a starry sky and enwrapped in the festivity of the season, the two share a passionate kiss that finally sees you letting go of that breath you've been holding in for a while.